Now it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Just not cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel? Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical Russ Belville.
Thank you. Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. I'm Radical Russ, coming to you live from Cannabis Radio headquarters in beautiful, warm, cloudless, blue sky, Scottsdale, Arizona. I'll tell you, this is recharging my batteries. It's tough being in Portland, Oregon in March. Have you ever been to Portland in March? From like October through April, our weather forecast in Portland is gray with a continuing chance of wet, highs and lows near 45, plus or minus 7 degrees, winds out of everywhere. So, just being able to see the sky and the sun, just rejuvenating. So happy to be here. Big thanks to all the family here at CannabisRadio.com for having me, hosting me here, as we get ready for what's going to be a really big season in marijuana. And I always like to say that the marijuana activism season starts on April, the first weekend of April. This year it's April 2nd. And that's because the first weekend in April, the first Saturday of April, is the Ann Arbor Hash Bash. It's the longest running continuous marijuana protest. Has to do with activist John Sinclair when he was busted, given 10 years for 2 joints. John Lennon, Stevie Wonder, a bunch of other folks came to his aid. They held a kind of protest and a concert there in Ann Arbor, and it's been going on ever since. I've never been, and I want really badly to go for my first time ever to the Ann Arbor Hash Bash. So we'll see. I still got to work up the budget and the travel schedule and all that. But the big thing happening in April is going to be on the East Coast, April 19th through the 21st, UNGAS. UNGAS. No, that's the United Nations General Assembly Special Session. And this is a special session that's called particularly to address the global war on drugs and global drug policy. A lot of this has been called for by Central and Latin and South American countries that are protesting, how much violence is occurring in their countries due to the prohibition of drugs that they're forced to maintain by international treaty. And yet there you got Portugal and you got Uruguay and you got some of the United States that are starting to decriminalize and legalize. And so that's unfair. And so that will be discussed in the United Nations in New York. And I will be there. I'm working on that too. But we will be there in New York for UNGAS to bring you some of that international coverage. Before UNGAS, there's a 3-day conference that Mark Kleiman is putting on, the UCLA public policy professor, on cannabis policy that has both pro and con, like Alan St. Pierre and Kevin Sabet will be there, for example. We'll try to cover that. And before that, in Baltimore, I think it is the Patients Out of Time conference. So there's this span of 9 or 10 days straight out there on the East Coast that we'll be bringing you some of the most important international and national news on the medical and legalization front. So you can always stay tuned here to CannabisRadio.com and the Russ Belville Show. That's the kind of stuff we like to cover. Also, if you want to get involved here, this show is the voice of the marijuana nation, and that means you are the voice of the marijuana nation, not me. I'm just the host. You are the voice. And the phone lines are open at 971-533-7111. If you want to call in, talk, got any topics you want to cover, questions you want to ask, suggestions you want to make, we're always here for you. 971-533-7111. And that's a 24-hour number. You don't have to call just at 4 o'clock Pacific. You can call anytime and leave us a voicemail. If we like your voicemail, we will play it on the air. All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about Bernie Sanders' chances now that the Super Tuesday 3 is done, and a new way to test potency in pot brownies and other edibles. Be back right after this.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Dr. Dabber, hurry! Its temperature is shooting past 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's burning up.
I'm afraid for this little guy, it's just too late.
What caused the problem?
Only Dr. Dabber can maintain the perfect temperature for a smooth-tasting, slower burn. This standard vaporizer lost all of its health benefits, sending it up in smoke.
So you're telling me that most vapor pens burn so hot they produce smoke, not vapor?
Correct. Keep away from those standard vaporizer pens and turn to Dr. Dabber. Doctor's orders.
Less heat, more flavor.
Legal to listen to all over the world. We're just not sure about France. CannabisRadio.com.
Coming soon to a city near you, Cannabis Finance Boot Camp. Get all your cannabis accounting, legal, and compliance questions answered by their knowledgeable panel of industry experts who want to help your cannabis boom. Whether you're a grower, dispensary operator, or a newcomer to the field, your cannabis needs Cannabis Finance Boot Camp. For information on upcoming events, visit CannabisFinanceBootCamp.com.
You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
Tommy Chong is ready to cut through the smoke and change the tone of Tilk Radio.
All you have to do is decriminalize. We don't need a government regulation to tell us this is good pot, that's bad pot. We don't need any of that.
The Tommy Chong Podcast, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to my world.
Pod 2.0. It's not your father's Woodstock weed. This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. 8 after the hour, live here from Scottsdale, Arizona. We got all sorts of great stuff coming up throughout CannabisRadio.com's schedule. Make sure you check out the Tommy Chong podcast, enormously popular. 2 episodes already in the bank. Comes on 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, every Wednesday night here on CannabisRadio.com. Also, don't forget Stoner Jesus is live at 5 o'clock Pacific, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And, of course, you got me for 2 hours every weekday, 3 to 5 Pacific time, on our live CannabisRadio.com schedule. More shows will be added. Make sure you check CannabisRadio.com early and often for all of the latest updates. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about politics because a lot of folks here in the cannabis movement are very interested in the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, running for the Democratic nomination against Hillary Clinton. And since this last Tuesday happened, Hillary Clinton won 4 out of the 5 primaries. Missouri, it's still too close to call in Missouri. And in doing so, she increased her delegate lead to win the Democratic nomination. And there is this theme, this propaganda being pushed on us by the mainstream media and by the Democratic establishment that want us to believe it's all over. He doesn't have a chance. He can't win. The math's not in his favor. Her lead is far too big. He'd have to win every remaining state by 58% in order to overtake her. Yada, yada, yada. And that brings me to a little discussion of Bernie Sanders and his continuing quest for this nomination. And the first part I'd point out is something that comedian Dennis Miller tweeted out the other day. And, you know, Dennis Miller, I was a big fan of him back in the 90s. And then afterwards, after SNL, he kind of became more conservative in his comedy and kind of turned me off a little. So I haven't really paid much attention to Dennis lately. But this tweet that he put out was pretty effective as far as I'm concerned. And he pointed out how Hillary Clinton currently has a delegate lead in the 300s. Last I looked, it was like 322. And we're talking about pledged delegates, the ones that have actually been voted on by the people, right? So she leads by about 322 delegates. Then he points out that under the Democratic system, there's over 400 super delegates that have already committed to Hillary Clinton. Those are the Democratic Party establishment, the elite that she already had in the bank before the campaign even started. And Dennis makes the point that if you take those over 400 and you put him in the Bernie column, then he's got more delegates than Hillary does. The point being that if the Democratic establishment really wanted to support the more progressive candidate, they could, and if they did, he'd be winning. Another point that you'll hear from the other side is how Hillary now has more votes than anybody. She's like 2 million votes, 2.5 million votes. And where that is misleading is that the states that she won were states where they do voting in the traditional sense, and the states where Bernie has been more successful are states that are caucus states that don't have the same number of votes as you would if you were doing a general vote. So that's a misleading statistic as well. It should also be pointed out that this is going to be the high watermark of Hillary's delegate lead. This is it. March 15th is the best lead she could rack up because the schedule was front loaded with states where she's going to do the best. I'm talking about the Confederacy, the South, where she swept all the southern states. She added Florida and North Carolina in this most recent election. So she swept the southern states. She's won the Confederacy, which we should all recognize is never going to vote for a Democrat in the general election. So Hillary has shown herself to be popular in states where she can't possibly win. So what good is that? On the other hand, Bernie has shown himself to be the winner or competitive to at least the level of a statistical tie with Hillary in the states that are the swing states that actually define and choose the president of the United States. Furthermore, states coming up in the primary schedule are almost overwhelmingly states that will favor Bernie Sanders. So Hillary's delegate lead is going to shrink as we approach June and we get toward that June 7th California primary. Now, Democrats do issue their delegates in a proportional manner. So that means that even if Bernie wins, if it's a 51-49 win, they're both going to get about the same number of delegates. And that's where the naysayers say, see, he has to blow her away. He has to win 58-42 to be able to increase the delegate count enough so that she's not also just, creeping along with him. And that does make the mathematics fairly daunting for Bernie Sanders. But I think people are underestimating the power of momentum. If it is seen from March 15th through the rest of March, through the rest of April, through the rest of May, that Sanders is winning. Sanders wins this state. Sanders wins that state. Sanders wins this state. Hillary's lead is shrinking. As that continues to develop, and as Donald Trump continues to solidify his hold on the Republican nomination, the issue that'll be foremost in the minds of Democrats will be which of these candidates can beat Donald Trump. And it's going to become increasingly obvious that Hillary will not be the one who can do that. It'll become increasingly obvious that Hillary is so vulnerable to attacks from Donald Trump that Bernie would not be vulnerable to. It would become increasingly obvious that this is the election about change and rejection of the establishment system. And if you put the establishment candidate, Hillary Clinton, against the non-establishment candidate, Donald Trump, you lose that particular zeitgeist. You lose that in your support. So it's going to become increasingly obvious that Bernie's going to be the better challenger, who's going to drive more young people to the polls, who's going to increase the turnout that not only gets a Democrat elected president, but gets Democrats elected in the House and Senate, and possibly turns those two chambers and gives us a complete Democratic administration instead of a Hillary Clinton nomination, which will lead a lot of young Bernie Sanders type supporters to stay home and not vote. enabling not only Trump to capture the Republican presidency, the House to gain more seats on the Republican side, and possibly the Senate to fall to the Republicans. That's going to become increasingly obvious in the political calculus. And as Bernie has that momentum and continues to pile on delegates and gets closer and closer, if he closes to within 150 delegates or 100 delegates or 50 delegates, do perhaps some of those super delegates start to jump ship from Hillary Clinton? Do some of those superdelegates start to feel the burn, start to feel the pressure from the people in the states that are continually electing or choosing Bernie Sanders? Do they start to switch and maybe tip that balance over to Bernie Sanders? It may be a long shot. I'm not politically naive, but I think it's a long shot worth fighting for. I think it's a long shot that we as cannabis consumers owe it to ourselves to fight for, being that Bernie is the only candidate calling for the absolute descheduling of marijuana, while Hillary Clinton will nibble around the edges of rescheduling to Schedule 2 if perhaps maybe there's enough research. I think the choice is pretty clear, and I think it's important for those of us who feel the burn to not let ourselves get down. Think of all the amazing electoral miracles we've accomplished in the last 20 years. This is when people tell me, and you hear this a lot. I see this on my Facebook feed from these so-called self-styled anarchists. You want anarchy, move to Somalia. But these anarchists who say, oh, there's no point in voting. Your vote doesn't matter. They're all bought and paid for. Voting doesn't change anything. Whip out your medical marijuana card and tell me that voting doesn't change anything. Take a visit to Colorado on 420 and tell me voting doesn't change anything. Voting changes everything. That's what they're most afraid of. That's why they keep making it harder and harder for us to vote. Voting changes everything. So continue supporting Bernie Sanders in this election. There are a lot of state primaries yet to be decided. Don't let the mainstream media convince you this is over, because frankly, they have to. They have to make that push now. They have to convince us now that it's impossible. Because the only way it is possible is if we're not convinced of that. If we really believe in the long shot, and if we keep fighting and donating and marching and showing up at rallies, and most importantly, registering our friends and our family as Democrats, even if we're not. Like, I know a lot of you folks are libertarians. A lot of you folks are moderates, and some of my fans are even conservatives. I would encourage all of you to switch your party registration to Democrat just to vote for Bernie Sanders. Just to put the screws to the DNC. You can always change your affiliation back after this election. But just because a lot of states now, you might not have to. Some states have open primaries. Check your Secretary of State's office, ask people who know this stuff. But some states, you don't have to change your registration. You can go vote in anybody's primary. And if that's the case, do it, right? But, Oregon, my home voting state, has a closed primary. So you have to register Democrat if you want to vote for Bernie Sanders. If you're an independent that wants to see Bernie Sanders, you need to get your registration changed. Make sure you get that done. In a lot of states, you have to have it done like a month before your primary or 2 weeks or whatever. So check those rules and regulations, but get yourself registered and make a difference here. I know a lot of you conservatives out there are not at all thrilled with the rise of Donald Trump. So make a stand. It's beyond the point of voting in your Republican primary at this point. He's going to secure the nomination. You're not going to stop him with a cruise or a cruise missile. I wonder if anyone's used that yet. You're not going to stop him with the cruise missile or a karate Kasich. So get used to the fact that Donald Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. And if you want someone to fight him, and the best chance of anybody left to fight him is Bernie Sanders. Conservatives, make that commitment, make that leap of faith. Register as a Democrat in your state, especially if you're listening to me in California. Register as a Democrat in your state, although I don't know if California has an open primary. Whatever, register and make that vote heard. Let's push this. We're used to have to fighting against the establishment. We're used to have to fighting these narratives that it's impossible. Who in the world would have thought legalizing marijuana would have been possible? I've been in this since 2005, and I remember us projecting, well, maybe by 2020. Things can happen fast when we really believe in it, folks.
I am so full of anticipation that my genitals have sucked up into my body cavity.
That's a bummer. Hey, well, folks, it's 4:20 here in Arizona because they don't do daylight savings time because they got plenty of it already. Happy 4:20 to my friends back on the Pacific Coast, Pacific time. Enjoy your safety meeting. We'll be back in 2 minutes on CannabisRadio.com.
CannabisRadio.com keeps you in the know Monday through Friday on air and on demand with Cannabis Radio News. Presented with the definitive worldwide news source, the Associated Press. Stay informed with exclusive news on all things cannabis. Cannabis Radio News, live weeknights at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, during the Russ Belville Show, or download the daily podcast exclusively on CannabisRadio.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. When breaking news happens in the cannabis industry, Cannabis Radio News delivers the details first.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere. Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, SoundCloud, Snapchat, LinkedIn, and Boise State University's 2400 baud modem bulletin board system from 1985.
It's time for Cannabis Facts about Alzheimer's from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A new Florida study in the journal Molecular and Cellular Neuroscience found that cannabis promotes the growth of healthy new brain tissue. It can slow the effects of Alzheimer's and may in fact be able to halt it entirely. A long-term study by Ohio State University's Professor Gary Wenk concludes that people who regularly use marijuana get Alzheimer's at a much lower rate than others. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
Being green is good. Growing green is good. Making green is great. CannabisRadio.com.
Don't want to spend money on a night out, but don't know what to do other than watching TV or playing video games? Consider playing guitar, bass, banjo, or mandolin. The instrument will give you hours of entertainment with friends with minimal expense. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
And Blue Blasten Gergen, Pfaffender Blasten, Schnurb Norben. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everyone. 23 after the hour. Hope that you had yourself a good safety break. Let's get into some marijuana stories that have been sitting in my news feed I wanted to talk about. This first one, a little bit of science for you. We're big fans of science here on the Russ Belville Show. The story was on National Public Radio. You can find it on npr.org. Maanvi Singh writes it, and it's entitled, How Potent Is That Pot Brownie? Dry ice and a blender might crack the case. And it investigates something that I hadn't really put a lot of thought into, and that is, how exactly do you tell how potent a candy bar, a Rice Krispie treat, a cookie, whatever medicated food might be? They're big sellers. I mean, everybody loves the medibles. We found something like 40% of the sales in Colorado were these medible sales of gummy bears and cookies and such. And there's been a lot of variation in their potency. We've found tests that have shown some 100 milligram candy bars containing as much as 160 milligrams of THC, or as low as 0.3 milligrams of THC. I mean, just crazy variation. And part of this may be a problem with how we've been trying to determine the potency of these products. It's important that we get this down. If something is more powerful than you're expecting, it can cause all sorts of terrible reactions that lead people to emergency rooms and cause really bad headlines for the legalization movement. On the other hand, if it's too low in THC, you've got patients that are needlessly suffering when the medicine they expect to work doesn't pack the punch it's expected. So we've got to come up with a way, better techniques of preparing these edibles so that there's some consistency in their THC values, in their potency. And part of that involves having to change the way we test this. And this is where we get some new insight from Jehan Marku, who's a senior scientist at Americans for Safe Access, who is presenting at the American Chemical Society conference. He presented this last Tuesday, a new way of testing pot edibles. Jehan Marku says, quote, essentially what we're recommending is to take the cannabis product and freeze dry it with dry ice or liquid nitrogen. End quote. The next step, Marku says, is to mix the freeze-dried candy or brownie with diatomaceous earth. You know what that is? That's that powdery stuff that's really like super sharp at a microscopic level. It's a silica-based powder, and it's used sometimes to keep snails out of gardens. I know people that use it in their pot gardens to keep aphids and such, mites and such off of their plants. When these critters, they slither over the diatomaceous earth, it slices them up. And so that's how that works, right? It's not any harm to humans because the sharpness of it is at such a small scale that it doesn't affect us. To us, it's kind of like a powder. So you take this freeze-dried candy or this brownie, you mix it with the diatomaceous earth, you pulverize it all together in a high-tech blender, and you get this smooth, homogeneous, dry kind of sample. And Marku says this is a whole lot better than trying to analyze things like gummy bears or peanut butter. He says, quote, a great way to ruin your $250,000 piece of lab equipment is to put some sugary, sticky substance into it, end quote. So you desiccate these, you grind these up into a powder. He says it makes it a whole lot easier to work with. Also, it makes it so the testers can use smaller samples in their testing and therefore reducing the amount of product that has to be used in coming up with an accurate reading. He says this is still in its early stages. They still have to work out some kinks in this, but says someday this could be the standard for all marijuana-infused products. Now, other people aren't as sanguine on the idea. One of them is Brian Thomas. He's with the research institute RTI International. Now, he wasn't involved in the research, but he says that universal standards for marijuana just might not be possible. He says, quote, the more ingredients a product has, the harder it'll be to analyze. Even subtle differences like a chocolate chip cookie with walnuts versus a plain chocolate chip cookie could complicate the testing process. And then there's also the consideration of how it was made. Was it made with vegetable oil, made with butter? That could determine how the THC is absorbed into your body faster or slower. So the potency of the product may only just be one variable. Another variable might be the ingredients that are in the product that slow or aid the absorption of that THC. So there might be just too much variability to come up with any sort of standardized sample. So people are still working on this, and Jehan Marku is well respected in the cannabis community. So I have faith that he and his team of scientists will come up with something better than what we've got so far. Now, another story that I wanted to talk about is one that is blowing up on BuzzFeed. A very long article written by Amanda Chicago Lewis called How Black People Are Being Shut Out of America's Weed Boom. And this illustrates a very, very important topic as we move forward in the green rush. And that is that we are finding the green rush to be overwhelmingly white. Michelle Alexander has addressed this fact as well. But one thing that I think gets lost in this, and when we see these headlines, we hear this complaint, and I'm not trying to delegitimize the complaint. I think it's a legitimate complaint, of course. We need to have more minority involvement in the cannabis industry, no doubt about it. But what I fear in this discussion is the assignment of the racism to the people, largely the white people, involved in the cannabis movement. as if it's me, privileged white guy, who's in the cannabis movement, somehow trying to keep black people out of the movement. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And what it really is here is an example of the institutionalized racism that no doubt the war on drugs and marijuana in particular has exacerbated and been a tool of. No doubt about that. But that it's a bigger problem than just marijuana. And this brings me to a quote from one of my favorite people, Dr. Carl Hart, who African-American professor at Columbia University, who's the author of High Price and one of the leading experts on addiction and drugs. And Ngaio Bilam, my friend from California, the comedian and journalist and activist, was interviewing him in Legalization Nation and asked, what do you make of the critique that rich white males stand to gain the most from legalization? And Dr. Hart answered, yeah, I sympathize with that person, obviously. I mean, I sold marijuana, But the fact is this. We can't expect one fledgling developing industry alone to solve this major problem in the United States, which the Republic has ignored since we came out of slavery. That's not even logical. Other companies and industries don't even have to deal with these questions. No one's asking the lottery industry about this. My aunt for many years ran numbers. She got put out of business when Florida got the lottery. No one was talking about that. Black folks got shut out. So yeah, we can expect to see the same thing in this industry if we don't put pressure on cannabis to hire them. But we shouldn't say, well, we should not have this industry because of that. That's nonsense. More people going to jail as a result. And I think that's a great point Dr. Hart brings up. The reason why black people are being shut out of the marijuana industry owes to the very racism of prohibition in the first place. Prohibition was invented to control black and brown people. It was all about locking up the Mexicans for their loco weed and controlling the Negroes for their cocaine and so forth. All these drug laws have a racist origin, and they were designed for racist purposes of control of certain people. Now, that got expanded a bit in the Nixon era when it was not just blacks and Latinos they wanted to keep down, the American Indian movement as well, but also the young white kids that were protesting the Vietnam War, growing their hair long and burning their draft cards and bras. And Ehrlichman, Nixon's aide, in his memoir, talks about how Nixon and their administration discussed that the problem they needed to control was the blacks and the anti-war protesters. And a way they could do that was through drug prohibition. They could infiltrate, based on that and bring down some of these organizations. So there was already a racist foundation for the war on drugs. Now, that racist foundation caused far more black and brown people to be busted for drugs. And we've seen that in numerous reports, numerous stats we've talked about with the American Civil Liberties Union and such, and the Marijuana Arrest Project and so forth, where we find black people are four times more likely to get busted for weed, despite the fact that we use and sell and traffic and grow weed at about the same rates, white and black people. Now, you already start with that foundation of prohibition and racism. And then when legalization happens, legalization laws are written in such a way that you cannot get a license in the legit industry if you have a prior criminal record. Well, who's more likely to have the prior criminal drug record? The blacks and Latinos, who were more likely to get busted for weed. So right on its face, legalization inherits a racism. It inherits that prohibitionary racism. And I see comments on some of these stories where some people say, well, yeah, but if you have a criminal record, you can't get a liquor license either. Right, but you couldn't have gotten a criminal record as a home beer brewer. You couldn't have gotten a criminal record possessing a beer. Okay, so that response makes no rhetorical sense. Only with marijuana can you be shut out of the very industry you were a part of for getting caught at it. And you're more likely to get caught if you were black or Latino. So the first thing we need to do as an industry, as a reform movement, is to change those requirements. If it were up to me, having been busted for dealing or growing would earn you points on your application. I know that sounds counterintuitive to some people. We should reward people for participating in the illegal industry. Don't think of it as rewarding them. Think of it as the enticement to move them out of the illegal industry. And furthermore, don't you want the people who have the best talents and skills to be in the industry? Don't you want them to be licensed and regulated, inspected and taxed? Rather than forcing them to stay outside of the industry and leaving them back to their black market as their only way of participation? That makes no sense whatsoever. We should encourage people who've been busted before. It should be our form of reparations. And it's the kind of reparations that wouldn't be racially based, although it would have a racial effect. Because more of the black and brown people have been busted, they'd be more likely to get the extra points to become part of the marijuana industry. But still, if you were white and poor and got busted, you could have that same reparation because you suffered under prohibition as well. That seems to be the way that I would fix this problem. And then on top of it, do like we're doing in the state of Oregon and make it easier for people to expunge their prior records for doing what is now legal. Let's keep working on that and get all these other states to adopt that kind of policy. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with more stories here on Cannabis Radio.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
The next generation of vaporizers has arrived. Vuber vaporizers are blazing the way with unparalleled technology for oil, concentrate, or dry flower pens. Providing unsurpassed customer service and expert craftsmanship, Vuber vaporizers use cutting-edge technology, providing a power-packed, smoother vapor with a lifetime guarantee. Experience vaporizing the way it was meant to be. The Vuber way.
Cannabis use isn't the only thing growing, so are we. Grow with us. CannabisRadio.com.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Tommy Chong is ready to cut through the smoke and change the tone of Tilk Radio.
All you have to do is decriminalize. We don't need a government regulation to tell us this is good pot, that's bad pot. We don't need any of that.
The Tommy Chong Podcast, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to my world.
Pod 2.0. It's not your father's Woodstock weed. This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everyone. 38 after the hour, live at the base of Camelback Mountain here in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's beautiful. Blue skies, sun is shining. There's a couple of birds out front. I'm looking through the window. There's some birds out on the lawn pecking away at an orange that has fallen from the tree. They're fighting for marijuana legalization here in the state of Arizona. Marijuana Policy Project has the campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol, or CRIMLA. It's a pretty typical marijuana legalization. 1 ounce, 6 plant kind of thing. Dispensaries, grows. Not too dissimilar from what you'd find in the currently legal states. Plus some benefits in that it would allow for some sort of pot lounges. And it would help the medical marijuana patients here by allowing people to have their own home grows. Currently, medical marijuana patients in the state of Arizona are not allowed to home grow cannabis if they live within 25 miles of a medical marijuana dispensary. This is the infamous home grow halo, the 25-mile halo that was passed in 2010. It appears to me that with the passage of marijuana legalization under CRIMLA, that halo would no longer have an effect because you'd legally be able to cultivate personal marijuana at your home. Now, there's a competing group called Arizonans for Mindful Reform that are pushing their own form of legalization, which is another one of those true legalization type efforts that believes MPP's initiative is too regulatory and too strict and the limits are too low and so forth. And I've evolved a bit on my position on these things. Used to be I just would rail about stoners against legalization, right? People that were against a legalization plan. But now I've kind of divided into two camps. There's true legalizers and there's stoners against legalization. Now, the true legalizers are the types that support the Jack Herer Initiative or the Arizonans for Mindful Reform or the Mo Crap Act in Missouri, that believe in true legalization, that there shouldn't be penalties for marijuana no matter what the amounts are, that we should be free to grow it and sell it and buy it, the taxes should be low, and et cetera. And it's nothing I disagree with. This is why I've had to come up with this subcategory of true legalizers, because I'm a true legalizer. I believe in those things. I think, the Russ Belville True Legalization Amendment. Grow as much weed as you want. Have as much weed as you want. Keep the taxes low. Set the maximum price at $20 an ounce. Give everybody a free quarter pound on their birthday. Make Jack Herer's birthday a national holiday. I'm all for that. Great, let's do it. But I'm also a realist who recognizes that that's not going to pass yet, and that we've got to get there through a series of steps. And that's where the divergence happens between true legalizers and stoners against legalization. A true legalizer supports their amendment, supports their initiative, their true legalization. They campaign for their legalization. A stoner against legalization campaigns against somebody else's. Now, you don't have to be both. You can be a true legalizer who supports your Arizonans for Mindful Reform or your Jack Herer Initiative, your MCLR, your Mo Crap Act, whatever. You go forth, gather your signatures, put it on the ballot, campaign for it, vote for it. I'll be there with you. But where you lose me is when your true legalization turns into fighting against somebody else's legalization for not being true enough. For turning to an MPP initiative that would guarantee fewer people get arrested, that would guarantee fewer people go to prison, that would guarantee more people get medicine. And to fight against that in favor of the status quo, that is unacceptable. So be a true legalizer. All for that. The more voices, the better. The more initiatives, the better. I've even come around on that. I used to be against there being multiple initiatives running for the fear that, you're going to divide your possible signature gatherers. You're going to have more possibility of spoiled petitions thanks to double signatures. You might confuse the voters with having more than one petition or more than one initiative to vote on. I've come around on that. And the reason I've come around is because I've come to believe that if you're a professional organization like MPP, it wouldn't matter how many other initiatives are running. You've got paid signature gatherers. You're going to gather enough signatures. So I worry about that less now. And I've come to identify another angle on this, and that is, and it's something that I kind of came to identify in 2012 when Oregon was running Measure 80. And it's this idea that if there are two initiatives running, the second, more liberal of the initiatives may work in a fashion to encourage more conservatives to vote for the moderate legalization. Kind of in the sense that, there's one pothead legalization and then there's another professional legalization. And we'd be better off with the professional, well-regulated one than the one that's liberal and way the hell out there. Now, there is the consideration that some of the people will be stoners against legalization. They will support the more liberal one and vote against the more conservative one. But now I think the additional conservative votes that you would add for the more moderate of the legalizations would balance out or even outweigh the stoners against legalization votes. So I'm not as afraid of it as I used to be. I still don't think it's optimal. I still wish everybody would gather together behind one initiative and fight for it. But then again, I wish everybody in the Democratic Party would gather together behind Bernie Sanders and fight for him. And it's just not reality. It's just not happening. So we have to accept what reality is. There are going to be true legalizers out there that are going to move forward with their true legalization initiatives. And so let's let them. Go ahead. If there's more than one initiative on the ballot, I'll vote for both of them. I'll sign both petitions. But don't try to convince politically naive, mostly young people that somehow legalization in the other form is going to make their lives worse. It's just not true. Sometimes the people in the medical states try to convince me of that. They say, well, look at I-502. After it passed, all these terrible things happened to medical. Right now in Oregon, they're trying, let's see, we passed Measure 91. We said they wouldn't mess with medical. And look what they did. They made it illegal to purchase extracts at dispensaries. That's a new thing, by the way. This just happened recently. Our Oregon Health Authority decided that all these dispensaries that up till now had been selling vapor pen cartridges and slabs of shatter and such, that now they can only sell them from licensed processors. Problem is, there won't be any licensed processors till October 1st. So here we've got a whole 6 months we're going to go where none of our existing dispensaries that had been selling extracts will be able to sell any more extracts. Now, those that still have extracts, they still can sell what's on their shelves. But once that's gone, they're not going to be able to replace it. So get ready for the price of extract in Oregon to go through the roof as people have to return to the black market, and get ready for a whole lot more traffic on the interstate and Glen Jackson bridges as people go across the border from Oregon into Washington state where they can buy those things. So this is this is frustrating, I understand, but I say we keep moving forward. More legalization, the better. I'm not afraid of extra initiatives at this point. All right, let me give you some information on the international front. Got an international story for you. Coming from our friends in New Zealand, where there is a cannabis crisis, a chronic shortage. You got to love The Guardian for their headline. New Zealand's cannabis crisis, smokers confirm chronic shortage. Haha, get it? The police in New Zealand seized over 9,000 cannabis plants, and that has had a severe impact on the supply of cannabis in New Zealand. They're saying it's dry out there, and the price has risen there from between $300 an ounce, New Zealand dollars, right? $300 an ounce, now going over $400 an ounce. Reports in Guardian Australia say they're having crappy 1 gram sales and $50 bags going for close to $100. A lot of people selling terrible indoor stuff or old rotted plant. So, and this 9,000 plants, I know it's kind of funny when we hear that here in America. We have a single warehouse in Denver could have 4 times that many plants, right? But 9,000 cannabis plants is more than double what they seized last year. They seized about 4,000 plants last year in New Zealand, 9,000 this year. And it's, again, causing a major shortage in New Zealand. 42% of all adults over the age of 15 have tried cannabis in New Zealand. It's still a prohibited substance. Penalties range from a $500 fine for possession, it's decriminalized there, up to 2 to 14 years in prison for growth, cultivation, supply, or manufacture. So you know who's most happy about New Zealand uprooting 9,000 cannabis plants? The black market dealers in New Zealand. They're thrilled about that. Thank you. Thank you for making the supply of cannabis drop to the point where we can jack up the prices and make more money. These people know that they can't outlaw the law of supply and demand. It's long past time for any of these drug warriors to be able to say with a straight face that what they're doing is having any sort of lasting impact whatsoever. Yes, we will see these temporary fluctuations. We will see times when a particularly large seizure in a particularly small or isolated area can cause a massive spike in price, a massive decrease in supply, but it's not long lasting. There will be more plants planted in New Zealand for next harvest. They will account for the police activities. There will be more imports. There will be more trafficking. It's never going away. 42% of your country's population has tried this substance, and they seem to like it. That's not going to change anytime soon. It's time for the governments around the world, and especially as we approach this ungas taking place in New York in just a month, it's time for these governments to recognize that what they've thought about addiction, what they've thought about cannabis, what they've thought about the drug war has been wrong for 80 years. It's time for these governments to recognize they can't outlaw the law of supply and demand, and to recognize that the harms that come from drugs, 90% of them come from the prohibition of drugs. Most people have a decent relationship with drugs. 85 to 90% of the people who try any illicit drug or use any illicit drug do not become addicted to it. Most people have a fairly healthy relationship with these substances. And the people that have problems with substances, as demonstrated by the famous Rat Park experiment, are people who have problems not with the drug, but with the cage they're in, with the life, the hand in life they've been dealt, with the suffering that they're trying to alleviate through the use of not just drugs, but sex or porn or gambling or shopping or hoarding. It's time to come to a new enlightenment about what we're really dealing with here, and let's hope the governments of the world at this latest ungas make some lasting reforms. Stay tuned, we're back in 2 minutes to close the show up. I'm Radical Russ, live from Scottsdale.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Tommy Chong is ready to cut through the smoke and change the tone of Tilk Radio.
You know, during Dance with the Stars, I started feeling discomfort. Yeah. And not only that, I was doing these old man smells. And it was kind of embarrassing because, you know, all the Dancing with the Stars crew, cast and crew, you know, they were all young kids. Yeah. You know, and then all of a sudden, this old guy would come along and do one of those silent farts, you know, that you don't know you're doing it. Yeah. And all of a sudden you smell, and everybody go, what the hell smells? And, you know, it was me. And so I'd scurry off to the bathroom, you know, and that's when I knew that there was something wrong.
The Tommy Chong Podcast, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to my world.
This is Dan Michaels from DanMichaelsAudio.com, and you're listening to Radical Russ on CannabisRadio.com.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's TheSilverTour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from TheSilverTour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
We don't limit how much you smoke, and we don't limit where you listen. Cannabis Radio is now on iTunes, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
and blue blasten gurgen pfaffen der blasten schnurb norben. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. 5 minutes to the top of the hour. And just reminding those of you who are here in the Phoenix, Arizona area, tune in to the CBS 5 News. I think that might come on in just 5 minutes, actually. But tune in to CBS 5 tonight. My interview with Derek from CBS 5 should be on. They came out to take a look at my legalization tattoos, and they went away with more knowledge and science about cannabis than they could have ever expected. I really think they showed expecting just to do some sort of light puff piece on this pothead with a legalization map on his back, and I don't think they were expecting the entirety of Radical Russ, let's put it that way. So I think it's going to be a really interesting story. I gave them a lot. I mean, they could have done a half hour with what I gave them, but we'll see what they do. A little 5-minute segment tonight on CBS 5 here in the Phoenix area. Also reminding you that we got a great show coming up for you tomorrow here on the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com. I believe we're going to be talking to somebody from the social network Doobie. And I got to get more info on that, but I think that's our guest coming up on tomorrow's show. And next week, of course, on Monday, Dr. Mitch Earlywine joins us for our Cannabis Q&A. On Tuesday, we're going to talk to Patrick Nightingale from Pittsburgh Normal. He's going to give us the update on Pennsylvania's medical marijuana law, which we hope by then will be signed by Governor Tom Wolf. He said he would be signing it, so we'll have our 24th medical marijuana state. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, with the 24th medical marijuana state plus DC, there are now more people in America who live with medical marijuana access of some level than do not. Now, I'm seeing on Cannabis Radio, okay, sister station AZ Family Channel 3. Okay, so it's not CBS 5. It's going to be on the Channel 3. It must be like a CW station or something like that. I don't know. But, okay, good to know. CBS Channel 3. Make sure I'll get that out on the Twitter as well. But yeah, so sorry, I just lost my train of thought there getting into that. But thank you for joining us on the show. We got more shows coming up tomorrow and the rest of next week. All sorts of great guests. And if you have any suggestions for story ideas or you want to talk to the audience here, make sure you call in our number, 971-533-7111. It's open 24 hours a day. You can leave a voice message if you need to promote an activist event, or you want to let people know about a bill or somebody's GoFundMe page for their legal bills or their medical expenses. That's why we're here. We're the voice of the marijuana nation, and that's you, dear listener. That's all the time we got for today. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more great content here on CannabisRadio.com. For everyone here at the headquarters in beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at RadicalRuss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.